The Alldus podcast is brought to you by Alldus International, supplying your expert AI and digital transformation staffing needs across the US and Europe. Today, you are listening to our AI in Action series, where leading minds in AI from across the world share their story, success, and advice. AI in Action cuts through the hype and explores the true impact of artificial intelligence in our world today.
You're listening to AI in Action. I'm your host, JP Valentine. Our guest today is Matthew Sappern. Matthew is the CEO at PeriGen. Matthew, welcome to the show.
Thanks, JP. Great to be here.
We're delighted to have you. So Matthew, let's start with yourself, please. Could you give us a bit of an overview of your background and journey from where you got started in the field? What's led you to where you are now as the CEO of PeriGen?
Sure, JP. I'm happy to do that. And one of the things that I've enjoyed most about your podcast is the interesting path that so many of your interviewers have taken. Like many, I really didn't start necessarily in technology per se. I spent probably the first 30-40% of my career in the media industry and working for corporate communications firms, and then a stint of about 8 years at home box office. It was at home box office, though, that I really saw the impact that technology can have, the way it can be so transformational. I was fortunate enough to be there at a time when the emergence of high-powered satellite was really just coming into focus. Licenses from the FCC were recently granted, and I'm talking about companies like the Dish Network and DirecTV. And I was fortunate enough to be part of a group that helped build that business from its infancy to a reasonably mature operating business over a stretch of about 5 years. And what I saw was the impact that digital broadcast satellite technology could have. It was generating much more real estate up on satellites. You could delivering far more content to consumers than previously, and it really changed the whole business model there. So from that point, I was always excited about technology and took part in a startup that was the consummate internet bubble business. It was great for a couple years until it wasn't. And from there, I actually traveled a bit with the chief technology officer I met and went to WebMD for a few years, which was really my entree into healthcare. And then from WebMD, I joined a company that was called Eclipsis that was building electronic medical records. At the time, it wasn't building them all that well. They had to pull back some technology from the market, and I joined to help them think through how to best iterate with customers to understand how to apply technology in a meaningful way and within their workflow. It's a constant theme. I use it a lot in PeriGen still 20 years later. And then ultimately, I left that company. It was acquired by a firm called Allscripts. Some of your listeners may have heard of. And I decided to leave for a much smaller company called PeriGen, which is doing some really remarkable things with artificial intelligence and all within the context of being software as a medical device and an FDA-regulated medical device.
Thank you for that, Matthew. It's a good visual of your journey and what's led to the formation of PeriGen. And you touched on it briefly there as some really cool and interesting use of AI, which is very challenging when you're operating in the FDA-cleared space. So tell us all about PeriGen, the idea behind the business, and what you're doing with AI.
PeriGen began, I think, as a lot of great companies do, with an overarching need that was becoming more and more obvious. It was really founded by, or I should say the current technology was really founded by an obstetrician. She was a brilliant obstetrician up in Montreal. She was part of the teaching staff at McGill University, and she continued to be frustrated by the fact that nurses were bringing her and her colleagues into labors that have already progressed down a particularly bad path. PeriGen works with fetal heart strips, so if anyone out there recalls having a baby or being in the room when it was happening, the nurse is looking at a electronic fetal monitor, which is essentially displaying electronically the fetal heart tones, the maternal vitals, the rates of contraction. These are all windows into how the mom and the baby are tolerating labor. And so the founder of the company, the founder of the technology, was an obstetrician, and she was very frustrated because she was always being pulled in too late when all of these key markings had already fallen off a cliff and leaving her very little to do from an intervention perspective outside of maybe a cesarean section, which is usually the last thing you want to get to. This is for babies, JP, that have gone term in labor. So 36 weeks of gestational age. Premature babies, a whole different thing. But for the more than 90% of babies in North America and most of Europe that get to term, you want to try and avoid a C-section if you can. And so she was frustrated by the amount of variability that she was getting from her nurses and decided there must be a way to create some sort of a standardized view and improve consistency. And that is what she set about doing years and years ago. And so thousands, if not tens of thousands, of fetal strip markings being reviewed by a number of physicians to figure out how to teach these neural networks how to recognize patterns on a fetal strip. So fast forward 15 years, PeriGen is now able to let nurses and nurses and physicians know when the mom or the baby are starting to show signs of faltering during labor, giving a lot of opportunity for other types of interventions. It's interesting to note, JP, that if a baby's come to term, again, from a gestational age perspective, a term baby, 36 weeks and beyond, when there's a bad outcome, and there are, more than 50% of the bad outcomes are preventable, and they relate back to typically a nurse misreading or not recognizing signs of distress on that fetal strip or with the mother. Oftentimes, it's also the inability to articulate that in a meaningful, clear, concise way to the physician to agree on an action plan. And so it's really difficult for all of us at PeriGen to see this still continuing. We're constantly being called in when there was a bad outcome, and we are able to show where our solution would have helped. So that's, I think, is a really interesting application of AI and a really interesting sort of workmanlike view on how to apply advanced technologies within current state of workflow to solve very real and enduring problems.
It's fascinating, and it's such an amazing use case when you talk about AI for good. The potential impact here is truly life-saving. The statistic that you talked about there, 50% of bad outcomes are avoidable. So you're really trying to tackle that field, which is super exciting for people who want to work on technology that can have an impact.
And JP, it's happening out even, we're very thrilled to be a leader in obstetrics. I just read a report from MIT that showed the impact that AI is having in radiology. Ultimately, if you look at healthcare on a sort of a vast, expansive perspective, that there are fewer and fewer nurses every day. There are fewer and fewer physicians every day. There are a growing number of patients. The percentage of those patients that have very complex comorbidities are growing. So these are diametrically opposed and really bad trends, but you do have the ability to capture data more. There's more medical devices. The medical devices are ultimately becoming more portable, whether it's a Fitbit you're wearing, an Apple Watch you're wearing, whether it's some sort of Bluetooth cardiac monitor that you are in your home or connected Internet of Things, scales and blood pressure cuffs. The ability to generate data in a very accurate way is increasing tenfold at the same time where the number of professionals who can assess that data is actually dropping. So there is not only a great opportunity, but frankly, a survival need to be able to apply these types of technologies to assist the clinicians and the physicians.
PeriGen launched as a business in the mid-90s, and you've been on board as CEO over 10 years now. And during your tenure is when we've seen the explosion of data science and AI and its potential use cases. Give us a look behind the scenes of the broader AI team, particularly now, and talk about its journey from 10 years ago when you joined, the evolution of these wearables and devices to the current environment of the AI team at PeriGen.
Sure. The big change that occurred really, JP, was our company's commitment, which was a decision that I made and had to convince our board of, that the only thing that we were doing that was truly unique was, in fact, this pattern recognition technology. At PeriGen, when I joined, this pattern recognition technology was and also ran an afterthought. We barely sold it to anybody. You needed to have all of our other software to even qualify to be sold. I never really understood that, but within the first year of my getting there, I started the effort to essentially jettison all of our other business. And that was a bit of a rough moment for a new CEO. About 80% of our revenue, I told the board, was it's going to go anyway. We can either control it or we can see it attrite to competition over time. The only unique thing we have here is this ability to use AI to recognize patterns on a fetal strip. That's it. So let's double down, triple down, quadruple down on that and build what can be a truly unique and impactful warning system for these clinicians and physicians. To the board's credit, after a couple of rough conversations, they said, hey, we're behind you all the way. So the biggest thing that we did is really commit to it, JP. We said, this is our superpower, and we are going to go ahead and either live or die developing an entire platform around this capability. Now, fortunately, we had, in addition to a few obstetricians, one of which I mentioned, a few others that were consulting obstetricians, and frankly, obstetricians and maternal fetal medicine experts that work with us today from customers that love to help us generate new product ideas. But that was the right message for them to hear. We also have a brilliant PhD in biomechanics and signal acquisition. We work with a group of international interns and data scientists. We see this team growing more to be native PeriGen employees. Right now, we've got about 3 or 4 folks that are essentially working on all the data science behind this work now. But as we move into other areas of maternal care, and as we look at where we think this business can go, we see that number growing over time.
You are listening to the Alldus podcast. When you're looking to scale your team, or if you are interested in showcasing your company in a future episode, reach out today. Or if you're in the market for a new role, visit our website to view open positions, www.alldus.com.
As we mentioned previously, the landscape of use of data science and AI has changed so dramatically, even over the past 5 years. You talked about when you came into PeriGen, making a call early on to double down and invest in where you guys really were industry leaders. Looking ahead, how do you guys stay leaders in the field? What do you see as some of the challenges in remaining ahead of the game, and what are some of the milestones that you're working towards, whether it be on the technology side, whether it be on the growth of the company? What are some of the big things on the agenda for the next 2-3 years at PeriGen?
It would be very easy to feel like we have such a head start on our competition in terms of applying machine learning, and we do. We have a number of patents. We've got probably 600,000 babies and moms a year that we're currently monitoring. We've got 20, 30 peer-reviewed publications as to our efficacy. But, of course, we know we can't afford to do that because the rate of change is so significant. The technology, when we first started, we were using a very basic MATLAB technology, and now it's significantly, the number of tools that are available for use are so much more numerous and far more sophisticated, and the computing power is such that we know we can't really rest on our laurels. So we are applying our same technologies to go a little bit deeper into the fetus. So we're working with, one is a research project that we're doing with the Gates Foundation, another is a research project we're doing with the NIH, where we are applying our technologies to look for predictive signs for cerebral palsy in labor. But we're also in the future, JP, looking at what we can be doing on maternal health as well in general, and as well what is going on with nurse staffing, which seems like a pedestrian topic to try to tackle when we started from trying to discern when saving babies to shift over to how are we scheduling nurses seems maybe a little bit more a little pedestrian, but the reality is there's a lot of work to be done there to understand when these bad occurrences are happening, when the leading indicators of problems are happening, what are the parallels that we see from health system to health system. Is it education, training? Is it the day of the week? Is it the hour? Is someone trying to quit coffee and cigarettes? There's so many variables, obviously. And also that leaves us an awful lot to work on, JP, for the next decade or so. I think another big part of what we want to really tackle is internationally. We work right now with Baylor College of Medicine. They're a great longstanding customer of ours. They have a clinic in Malawi, which, as you may or may not know, is in the sort of 4 most poor nations in the world. This clinic is doing about 8,000 births a year. And before we installed our technology there, they were to either stillbirth or what would be termed early neonatal death a few weeks or months after labor. They were losing about 12 babies per 1,000. So that's roughly 96 babies a year. And now that after we've rolled our technology out there over the last 18 months, they're averaging about 1 per year. On that calculus alone, in a year, I think we've been able to affect the lives of 88 families, right? 88 babies that weren't going to be alive, 88 families that weren't going to have to deal with such a horrible outcome. And so there's great opportunity there in those developing nations. And I think there's great opportunity as well in developed nations like the US and a lot of Western Europe, where we're still suffering with 50% of these bad outcomes being iatrogenic in nature, where a nurse just misses or a doc misses something. So these are areas we feel like we have an awful lot left to do in the world. And that's what we're fixing to do for the next decade.
I want to ask a couple of questions specifically for our data science and AI audience, but then definitely want to finish on broader impact. But starting with the data science and the engineering side of things, you touched on it earlier, the partnerships that you have with some universities, and the view is to bring a lot of that in-house over the next few years. Most of our audience are data professionals who are tuning in to hear what's going on in the field, but also about what future career opportunities there may be. As somebody who sits at the highest table, you work with the various divisions in PeriGen. What sort of hiring are you going to need to make over the next 2 to 5 years to build out the team and make sure it's more robust? Specifically speaking to an audience of data professionals, what opportunities are there going to be for people to help you along this mission?
There's a few. The one thing we haven't really touched on yet is the number of clinicians, experienced labor and delivery nurses that we have on staff at PeriGen. It's a pretty big number. And in our mind, these are folks that are real multipliers of impact. It's always so important to be able to fit into the workflow of the nurse or whomever is using your AI technology. So there's always going to be opportunities for those folks. As far as people who are more in the data scientist realm, if we could find people with a clinical background that sort of veered away from patient care with some patient care experience, but then veered away more into informaticist roles and into medical data science roles, those are rare animals that we like to snatch up as soon as we can. We also try to work with the universities surrounding us. We're quite fortunate that we are based in Cary, North Carolina, which is not far from North Carolina State University, which happens to have a very well-respected computer science, mathematics, and engineering programs. And so we are looking at that university level for folks doing graduate level or doctoral level work that want to serve as paid interns and potentially segue into our staff. That's what we're trying to do to make sure that we are staying as current with the latest technology that's being used in the labs around universities. So those are great opportunities for us. So experienced, medical personnel that decide they're more interested in data than in patient care for the next chapter of their life. And then folks in university, in graduate or doctoral degrees are great for us as well. There's an alchemy that occurs when you bring those people together that for us has been very successful.
Final 2 questions from me then, Matthew, focusing on the impact that this can have. First of all, if there's expecting mothers or anyone listening who's family planning, how do they get access to this technology if they're not aware of it already? And then thinking about biggest impact, how do you get this into every maternity hospital across the country? And then expanding its borders to go global.
Sure. So let's tackle the first one first. So moms out there, you should be asking your physician if the hospital that they admit you to has this technology from PeriGen. A lot of them do. Unfortunately, more don't. We're probably, JP, in about 20% of the hospitals in North America, which is, we've had a lot of great growth. So that's great, particularly over the last few years. But we have a lot more to do. The more that patients talk to their physicians, the more likely it is we get call from these health systems saying we're getting a lot of moms who want this kind of increased safety. And really, who could blame them? Hopefully, all you moms out there, these are conversations you should be having with your physician anyway. Where am I being born? Is there a NICU there in case things don't go well? How do I have access to care? And add this to the list. What are you doing, health system X, from a technology perspective to ensure that I'm having this child in the safest possible place? So I highly recommend that you have those discussions with your physician, whether you're interested in PeriGen technology or not. Right now, JP, PeriGen technology is available in hospitals only. My expectation over the next few years is that we are working with partners to deliver monitoring capability into the home as well. So I think in 2 years from now, when you're interviewing me next, I'll be talking to you about how we are working with partners to capture data from devices in the home, doing analysis in the cloud, and indicating to physicians whether there's problems or if everything is on track. So put that down in your book for the first question you ask me 24 months from now.
I can't wait. I'm looking forward to it. Matthew, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate you sharing the origin story behind PeriGen and the impact that you're having. It really is one of the best cases we could think of for AI for good, and could not wish you more luck in achieving the mission that you're working on. Super excited about the next interview, and yeah, we're eager to help and support you along the way by getting your message out there as best we can. So thanks again for today, man. Really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate it too. I think if I could leave you and your viewers with one thought, it's, we need more health systems, physicians who are comfortable challenging the status quo. Before PeriGen came along, physicians were operating the same way as they have been for 50 or 60 years. And that's just really no way to tackle the problems that are cropping up now. The more that you can challenge the status quo, I think in any particular field, the better. The more open, at least, to it, the better. So that's our hope, and hopefully it's the same with you and all of your listeners. In the meantime, it's been a pleasure getting to know you, JP, and I've really enjoyed listening to all your podcasts.
Thank you so much, Matt.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Alldus podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and any Android podcast of choice. You can also head over to our website, www.alldus.com, to listen to more podcasts, view our open roles, and stay up to date with industry news. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more great episodes coming very soon.